What's up, Spellslingers? Chris, Legendary Mana. And again, it is always great to see you. Well, anyways, let's get into this. Black-White Zombies, standard deck tech. I'm excited. I can't wait to show this to you. Let's do this right now. Like that little zombie token? Probably one of the prettiest zombie tokens you've ever seen, right? Aaron Miller, one of my favorite artists. Just a little plug. I like his art. I use a lot of his tokens. For instance, I really like the Clue token that he's got. Those are pretty cool looking. So, at any rate, just figure I'd share that. All right, Black-White Zombies. This one is an adaptation with the new meta, with the one that I played at the PPTQ. I didn't post a deck tech on this particular deck previously, but I am posting one now because I think this is the right time for it to be played. It works Marvel, sort of slowed the deck down, but I was able to successfully beat Aethworks Marvel. Is it Control? The only ones that I kind of had issues with were black-green counters, but we've sort of solved that with the new cards from Our Devastation. So let's get right into it. We're starting out with 4 Cryptbreakers. Now, this card has 2 abilities that are good. The first one is you tap 2 to discard a card. You can put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. But the one that I use the most, and what I typically believe that is the best use in this deck, is the second ability, which is to tap 3 untapped zombies you control, and you draw a card, lose a life. This just allows you to continue to tempo out your deck and sort of get things out quickly. Next is our second and last 1-drop creature, and that's Dread Wanderer. It comes into play tapped, but it's a 2/1, and it's very similar to Scrap Heap's Grounder, to where you can bring it back to the battlefield when you tap 3. Now, originally, it just didn't have a ton of value. I mean, there was Binding Mummy and Wayward Servant, and there's still some of that mechanisms, but those were good. But when we talk about what's next and what is the zombie that is new in this deck, that's Mummy Paramount. Whenever a zombie enters the battlefield under your control, Mummy Paramount gets +1/+1 until the end of turn. Well, that helps out in a couple different ways in early game, as well as when you start playing late game with zombie tokens, and you'll see what I'm talking about. This card is pretty bonkers in this deck. It can get out of control really fast if not taken care of. So, and I'll go through those as we fill out the deck. But we have 4 Mummy Paramounts. Next up on the deck, we have Wayward Servant. So nothing different here. We had 4 Wayward Servants before, and this time we're running 4 Wayward Servants again. Whenever a zombie enters the battlefield, so it doesn't matter how, it doesn't have to be cast or anything like that. Whenever a zombie enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So that's pretty good. You can easily get this out there and start swinging away without swinging, per se. So we have 4 Wayward Servants in this deck. Next, it wouldn't be a zombie deck without Lord of the Accursed. Other zombies you control get +1/+1. Tap 2. All zombies gain menace until the end of turn. So that card, although is really powerful in this deck, isn't all that is a win condition in the ability that it pumps your creatures, but at the same time, I've often found that I'm actually happy them to take this out versus this or this, meaning Wayward Servant or Mummy Paramount. Now, these will be likely the targets that they hit early, but later on they may see this, and most people will go after Lord of the Accursed, or your next one, which is Diregraf Colossus. Diregraf Colossus enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter for each zombie card in your graveyard. Whenever you cast a zombie spell, put a 2/2 zombie creature token onto the battlefield tap. Think about this late game. You have Diregraf Colossus out on the battlefield, and you have Wayward Servant, Mummy Paramount. Here, we'll move these out of the way for the moment. And you bring in a Dread Wanderer and let's just say another Dread Wanderer or Cryptbreaker, right? Mummy Paramount will get 4 triggers overall. 2 triggers for these and the 2 triggers for the zombies that come out. As well as Wayward Servant will get 4 triggers as well. So drain 4 from your opponent and you gain 4 before you even start attacking. Keep in mind then, Mummy Paramount becomes a 6/6. So just something to think about when sort of thinking about strategies about playing this deck. And I'll go over more at the end of this, but I wanted to just point that out in the very beginning because it's a very important thing to note about this deck. So Diregraf Colossus, we run 4 of those. All right, next we'll move on to the spells. And spells are pretty straightforward, and I wouldn't say basic, but straightforward and nothing really crazy to them. We're running 3 Fatal Push. That is our only main boarded removal spell, so to speak. But there is other removal. Now, we're running 2 Unconventional Tactics. Now, let's just talk about the combo that I spoke about before with Mummy Paramount and Wayward Servant on the battlefield with Diregraf Colossus. So let's just say we again bring out Cryptbreaker. Let's say 2 Cryptbreakers or 2 single casting cost zombies. You not only get the 4 triggers for Mummy Paramount and Wayward Servant, but now you can then play Unconventional Tactics on Mummy Paramount, and Mummy Paramount, as it reads, target creature gets +3/+3 and gains flying until the end of turn. So you now have a 7/7 flying mummy that not a lot of people have a ton of flyers to block. So unless you're playing somebody that has a lot of flying creatures, this is going to likely get through. And if you're in late game, 7 damage coming at the face that late could be a game winner. Another thing about Unconventional Tactics that's pretty cool is the ability of the card while it's in your graveyard. Whenever a zombie enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 white. If you do, return Unconventional Tactics from the graveyard to your hand. So you could basically play this. Next turn, play a zombie, and you can bring it back to your hand and do it again. So overall, flying mummies, can't complain. They're pretty awesome. Next, we're running 4 Dark Salvations. Target player puts X 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield. Then, up to 1 target creature gets -1/-1 until the end of turn for each zombie that player controls. You play this for 1 if you have 2-3 zombies. It acts as instant removal. You give your creatures -3/-3. Now, here is the thing that makes this card really, really good, is you're not doing damage to it. So, for instance, indestructible creatures can be taken out with Dark Salvation. So Ronus or any of the gods that are indestructible can be removed from this. Additionally, these aren't treated as -1/-1 counters. So, for instance, this card is unaffected by Salinity. So it's very much still a relevant and heavy hitter when you're talking about dealing with black-white zombies. And lastly, we have Liliana's Mastery. All zombies get +1/+1, and when it comes into play, you create 2 black zombie creature tokens. So we play 4 of those. Next, we'll move on to the mana base, and it's a pretty straightforward mana base. We have 4 Concealed Courtyards, 4 Shambling Vents. We have 5 6 Plains. And we have 9 Swamps. Now, I want to take a moment and talk about Shambling Vent. One of the important things to understand and remember is even if you're facing somebody that's got creature removal, say Hour of Devastation, Bontu's Reckoning, stuff like that, you'd still have these as creatures, and they don't get destroyed with those removal cards. Additionally, it has lifelink, so you not only can swing in for damage when your opponent doesn't have creatures or your creatures get taken care of by mass removal, you can also gain life while doing it. So it's just one thing to remember when you are playing and you don't have any creatures and you need a creature to either attack or block with. All right, so let's move on to the sideboard. Now, the sideboard is, I would say, slightly interesting. You may not think about a lot of the cards I have in here. So first and foremost, I think a no-brainer is 2 Dusk to Dawn. Destroy all creatures of power 3 or greater. So you're talking about dealing with a lot of the big red creatures as well as dealing with black-green. And there's a few others out there as well. Falcon Wrath that has it's an 8/8 flying trample. So this can pretty much take care of that. And then Dawn allows you to return all creatures with the power of 2 or less from the graveyard to your hand if you need to play that. But most typically and most times you're going to use it mainly for the very first one. So we use 2 Dusk to Dawn. Next, we're using 1 Grasp of Darkness. This is for any of the eternalized creatures, typically speaking. There's other ones that are 4/4s, but I've been seeing a lot of eternalized creatures, which come back as 4/4 zombies. This is a perfect removal for that. So it just adds to the removal Dusk to Dawn package of getting rid of those. Next, for those pesky planeswalkers and anything else like Westvale Abbey and all those crazy permanents, and Westvale Abbey after the flip of Westvale Abbey. This allows you to just get rid of those pesky crazy things that you can't deal with normal removal. So we're using 2 Anguished Unmakings for those situations. Not to mention Gideon, which is still a relevant card right now. We have 2 Bontu's Reckoning to add to the removal pool. So this would be for things like mono red or a bunch of, again, black-green counters, energy builds. Those things, creatures can get out of hand really fast. So just to add to that removal package. Next, to kind of help you save your zombies from your removal package, or let's just say any other removal package like Hour of Devastation, we're going to have 3 Selfless Spirits in the sideboard to bring in if necessary. Sacrifice it to give your creatures indestructible until the end of the turn. So we run 3 Selfless Spirits in the sideboard. Next, we have Declaration in Stone. We are running 3 copies in the sideboard. This is allowing you to exile a creature and all other creatures with the same name your opponent controls. Then they'll be able to investigate for each non-token creature exiled that way. So, for instance, I think of tokens decks, humans and stuff like that. This really deals with a lot of those pretty quickly, and you get away with not needing them to investigate because a lot of those token strategies, well, they won't actually get clue tokens. So that's pretty cool. And the final two cards are the ones that I actually took out of the main board, and this is for more aggro matchups. 2 Binding Mummies. Now, I wouldn't put them in anything else. And at some point, I may take these out for something else. But for now, I think the way I'm going to run it for these next 2 Friday Night Magics while I'm playing this deck is using 2 Binding Mummies. It synergizes well if your opponent is just getting more and more creatures out than you can handle. And your removal package is just not, coming up fast enough. I would sub 2... either 1 Wayward Servant and 1 Mummy Paramount, or you could sub out a Paramount and Wanderer. So there's a couple of ways you can work in Binding Mummy to work to your advantage. Next, I want to cover something that not a lot of people do. And what are some of the important things to note or to have in your opening hand when playing a game? And especially with this deck, in order for you to be successful with any other aggro or deck that has a lot of different pieces that work together, you need to have some sort of pecking order, some line of sight of what needs to happen. And so one of the things that I think about and what I was trying to decide when figuring out, how to carve out what is the strategy, the best line to win with this deck. And what you have here is I have some groups of cards. This is one group, this is another group, and then these 2 are also separate groups. And one of the things that I want to just sort of say is, okay, what are some of the cards that you need to have in your hand at draw? And it's okay if it's not exactly like this, but this is your ideal state. You would like to have at least two of these cards, Cryptbreaker or Dread Wanderer, or one of the 2. I usually like having Dread Wanderer because it's a nice, easy swing for 2 right off the bat, and if it dies by turn 3 or 4, I can bring it back if I need to, if I have open mana. But Cryptbreaker works too, because if you get 3 zombies out, you could start the engine of drawing cards. Additionally, I'd like to have at least 1 of either Wayward Servant or Mummy Paramount. And the reason for this is you want to start getting this out as quickly as possible by turn 2. Because with Wayward Servant or Mummy Paramount, they pump. Mummy Paramount pumps, Wayward Servant drains and gains as you play more creatures. And you're going to get more creatures out. So don't be tempted to play 2 of these if you have 1 of these in your first 2 turns, because you want to be able to take advantage of these bonuses before they either A, start getting to go, or has the ability to remove your creatures. Now, the nice thing about this is playing these early allows you to also bring out some of the removal or counter magic that your player has, because they're not going to want these to be on the board, and they are thinking, well, once these come out, it's just going to get really crazy. But the nice thing is even if you get these taken away early, or even these ones, that's fine. Because as you get your mana base, as long as you're playing land, as long as you're getting your land drops, these guys will save you between this, that, and playing Dark Salvation and Liliana's Mastery. Like, these cards are meant to save your butt when you are getting your creatures removed. So it's important to know that it's okay to lose your creatures ahead of time. In fact, I almost don't even care. If you get rid of my creatures, that's fine. So anyways, I always like to see 2 of this group, either Dread Wanderer or Cryptbreaker, 1 of either Wayward Servant or Mummy Paramount, 1 or none. You could actually have none of these, and that's fine too. But having one is pretty cool, because then you can carve out 1, turn 2, and turn 3, and then start that engine. And by turn 4, you could be playing 1 and 1, or 1 and 1, or 2 and 2, and or using removal, or bringing in unconventional tactics to pump up your creature. So it's always nice to even say, if you have the ability to have one of these in your hand ahead of time. Now, again, granted, these and these are not absolutely necessary, but you need at least these. And if you're not going to have these, then what you're going to want is kind of a ratio between 3 and 2, because then that allows you to sort of, again, help that engine and sort of carry yourself through until you can get this and this in your hand. Next, I want to talk about Cyborg Strategy. Now, I can't necessarily go through every single Cyborg situation because, well, first off, we just don't have that amount of time, and I haven't played everything that's out there. But I'd like to give you some basics on which cards could be taken out to sort of suit the purpose that you need them for. So let's start with the creatures. Now, if you want to bring in creatures, never, ever, ever, ever take out Fatal Push, Unconventional Tactics, Liliana's Mastery, or Dark Salvation. Don't take out any of these cards in order to fit in these creatures. You always want to use your creature base to flex that out. So typically what I usually will do is, if I'm going to bring in Selfless Spirit, I'll take out 1 Dread Wanderer, 1 Wayward Servant, and 1 Mummy Paramount to bring in my Selfless Spirits. That gives the flexibility that you need in order to do the things. You still have plenty of early entry cards, but then you have your bomb cards for finishers. And that's very important. Some people I've seen or heard previously would take out, Diregraf Colossus or Lord of the Accursed. Since you're going to have creatures go in the graveyard anyways, Diregraf Colossus is going to be important to have creatures in your graveyard anyways. It's more powerful that way. So I would always lean on taking these 3 out. Now, if you want to bring in Binding Mummy for sort of big creature aggro decks, what I would do is keep Wayward Servant and drop out 2 Dread Wanderers. The Dread Wanderers, them being tapped, coming in tapped, sort of hinders you a little bit, especially in late game. It doesn't help you out very much. Now, you can still have a total of 6 1-drops, which is good. But I would favor the 2 mummies over the Dread Wanderers if you need to have some more, more control over the board. Next, we'll talk about sort of the removal package. We'll get these creatures out of the way. So the removal package with, say, Declaration in Stone, with, say, token strategies, or creatures, people that have like big creatures, you can also use this to take care of Umalog, as well as Anguished Unmaking. So that's 5 removal spells for Anguished Unmaking. So a couple things that I would do when you need it for those kind of things. I think these Unconventional Tactics and Fatal Push can be very, hit or miss in when you use them. But you could always, like, say, if you're bringing in Declaration in Stone, you can pitch these 3, still have 2 Fatal Push for Deck in Stone. Now, if you want to just bring in Anguish Unmaking, then take out Unconventional Tactics. Because really what you're saying is I need to get rid of things that aren't necessarily creature-based, or things that generate creatures, or big creatures that just hinder your process. So this... or planeswalkers. So Unconventional Tactics, although is great, is not going to give you sort of that added value as it would, say, for aggro matchups. So when we talk about the rest of the removal package in Dust to Dawn, Grasp of Darkness, and Bontu's Last Reckoning, Usually, the way that I see it is if I need to bring any of these 5 in, I'll look at my creatures. And again, taking one-ofs out of a couple, like Dread Wanderer, Mummy Paramount, or even in some cases, depending on the matchup, you could take out two Diregraf Colossus. So, for instance, if there's a really, really crazy fast white weenie deck or token deck that just completely overruns you, Diregraf is not going to do anything for you. You want to get rid of their creatures fast. So you'll use the Bontu's Last Reckoning and Dust to Dawn. Well, Dust and Dawn wouldn't be for a weenie deck, but you get what I'm saying. When you need to sub out, I would use the creatures for these 5 removal. So you can always find a way to sort of bring those in to sort of take care of the things that you need to take care of. In control matchups, I always like taking out Fatal Push and putting in, say, either Deck and Stone or Anguished Unmaking, because in that case, you're going to be looking for either big creatures like Torrential Gearhulk or any of the other ones that Falcon Wrath that just really will devastate you in the end of the game, and you want to have one of these. So it's time to head over to deck stats, and let's take a look at the numbers of this deck. Now, the cost of the deck is going to be right around $120 for the main board and $37 for the sideboard. So you're roughly looking at about $157, $160 for this deck, which is actually really good considering a lot of the decks that I've seen out there are in the range of $300 to $250 to $300. Okay, so for a deck that is fairly competitive, it's actually a pretty good price. Additionally, you're using a lot of cards that are probably, if you've been playing Standard for a while, fairly relatively available to you. And the new cards that came out of our Devastation is actually not that expensive. So we're talking about Mummy Paramount, which is a whole whopping 60 cents for each of them. Unconventional Tactics, which is a whopping 44 cents for all of them. And let's see, what's the last one? I think, Bontu's Last Reckoning, which I think, let's see, what's the cost of Bontu's Reckoning? I forgot. They don't have that information on here. So I think Bontu's, though, is right around $5. Selfless Spirit is around $5. But again, a lot of these cards have been out for a while. So I would think if you've been playing Standard for a while, or if you've been playing in the meta, or playing Friday Night Magic, or competitive Magic, or semi-competitive Magic, you might have these cards laying around already. So card distribution for lands versus spell and creatures is pretty even keel. 22% on spells, 40% with 24 creatures, and 38% lands, 23 lands overall. Mana distribution, 35 black and 22% white. So pretty good ratio when it comes to that. So that's why we're running 9 swamps, 6 plains, but then we have Concealed Courtyard and Shambling Vent for dual color lands. So that all helps out. So probabilities, I'm not going to really talk much about these, but I always like to show these because I've had people ask me before, can you show that information? That's good, and I like that. So I'll just leave it here for the moment. You can pause it if you want, but we're going to move on to just looking at a starting hand. So looking at this starting hand isn't bad. I probably wouldn't keep it. Yeah, I would probably mulligan out. So you mulligan. Here we go. So we have a Swamp, Plains, Dread Wanderer, Wayward Servant, Fatal Push. Just the curve we're looking for, right? So you'd play the Swamp. You would play the Swamp and play Dread Wanderer. Turn 2, you play the Plains and play Wayward Servant. Then turn 3, you have a Plains, you can play Lord of the Accursed. And then it just keeps on going. So we go down the line, and by then, Dark Salvation, removal. So you have 2 fatal pushes. So basically, in 5 turns, you can be in a pretty good spot. Now, again, this is all, you know, whatever. I mean, this is just a simulation. This is not how it would actually go, because there's things like counters and removal and so on and so forth. But the idea is the initial hand that we got off the mulligan wasn't bad. 2 planes, Dread Wanderer, Lord of Curse, Wayward Servant, Fatal Push. That is perfect. That's exactly what I want to see. And, hopefully you get your land drops in there, provided that, you shuffled appropriately. So, well, that's the deck. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next time, I bid you farewell.